Everybody, this is AW. For anybody watching, the single beer, let me know if the stream is alright. It looks a bit choppy on my end. So maybe it looks choppy on your end, I don't know. But let me know. So you can see I'm at my usual hills here. It's a rather nice day. It's nice and cool, not hot, very comfortable. Looks a little bit pixelated. Okay, let me see. I'll restart the stream and hopefully that fixes it. All right. I don't know, does that look any better? At least it seems to be better on my side. I don't know how it looks on your side. If it's pixelated, it's probably because the bitrate is not so good, and that's a internet problem. Considerably worse. Still bad. Hyperion is it's still bad. Oh, it's still worse. All right. Let me see what looks like. Monet. All right. How about this? Any better? Yeah, I played the old Ataris. Yeah, I bet. All right, let me know if it's gotten any better or any worse. As far as I can tell, my signal is not bad, so I don't know if it what I would do to help that. All right, so better, yes. Just a little windy. Yeah, that was just because there is a bit of wind going sideways on the hill, but otherwise than that, I'm sitting in a little place that should not have that much wind. So that should be good. And man, just looking at myself here in the camera, I haven't seen myself in a couple days. I look tired. My night's sleep has not been so good, I suppose. It's not that comfortable sleeping in a car, you know. But that should be fixed hopefully in the next month. You know, 4 months this year. Monet to Picasso. Speaking of Picasso, you know, somebody posted something on one of those Facebook like art groups, and they were posting some Picasso, and like 4 of the comments were like, you know, my nephew, you know, who's like 10 years old, draws shit like this, which is exactly the stuff I used to say before I took an art appreciation class and learned what the hell Picasso was actually doing. And after that, I certainly appreciated it a lot more. I think they look quite nice now. Not my favorite, but I think that, you know, they're definitely up there with art. But anyways, the topic of the stream, how and why I got into philosophy. So I've talked about this before, you know, and but not I don't think I've ever made a stream that's specifically about this. And you know, and what brings me to talk about it today, I suppose. Hyperion and Joshua and I actually had an interesting conversation with someone we recently met online who found me through this YouTube channel. And Pierre and I at least have had one or two conversations with them that have been entertaining, if not that interesting, to be honest. We don't particularly agree with this individual very much, but sometimes, repetitive things get you to think about certain things. And it's also just that this question is always up there. Anyway, something came up in the conversation about language, and I mean, really, it's actually just cutting out right there. Sorry about that. Hopefully, I'm back. Let me know. But anyways, so it was about an issue about language and philosophy and whether philosophers have any duty whatsoever. As you can see, I've chosen a somewhat hard place to be climbing up. Although I like hard places. They're more interesting. Hey, Pyrion, Josh, let me know if the stream is back up. Alright, there we go. That should. Still feel a bit of wind coming on there. Just. Alright, hopefully less disturbance here. There was an argument, and I wouldn't really call it much of an argument, honestly, about whether philosophy has any necessity to connect to the common sense views and common sense language that people are used to. And this fellow thought that it had no necessity and that it was actually best if it didn't connect itself to any such necessities because, that's contingent and external. But, considering that he believes himself a very stalwart Hegelian, it was kind of an odd thing for me because as far as I've noticed, Hegel is the exact opposite. Hegel seems to operate in a way in which he sounds pretty weird at first, but if you're pretty open-minded about it and just willing to put in the effort to just slow down and think, even with just common conceptions of things, a lot of what he says is pretty intelligible. You can understand it. You may not go and say immediately, wow, that's definitely the absolute truth right there. But it's intelligible to you. And much of the argument revolved around something rather stupid, honestly. One of them was about whether what Hegel defines as a woman, for example, what it is to be either of those. Was arguing for the absolute. And because Hegel doesn't define himself according to what people empirically call things, doesn't draw his definition from the empirical, there's no need for him to care about the way people use language. Whatever he defines as woman, that's a woman, and whatever doesn't fit into that category, that concept, to that extent, it is or is not a woman. And I don't know how many of you viewers know much about Hegel's misogyny, but he did have some misogynistic things to say, which don't really make sense, now that we become more progressive. And oh man, the wind. Let me try to move out of the way of this. All right. it. What did I say it about? And is the sound okay? Is it too windy? Somebody can let me know in chat. That way, I don't waste that much time speaking and not being heard. It's serviceable. Okay. What did I say it about? So, anyways, to bring that around to the topic of the title, uh, oh, yeah, don't say. I've said it in other streams. They didn't get banned or anything. It's all academic, anyways. It's just some in jokes, people. But, anyways, so that brings to mind why someone would get into philosophy in the first place, right? I suppose going into like my own personal story of this, just like to give an example what I'm talking about. I am so different to how I used to be. It's it's unrecognizable in many ways. Just a decade ago, uh, I was not the kind of person who thought about the kind of things that I think about now, nor in the way that I think about them now. And my interests were not very close to what I'm really interested in now. For most of my teenage years, I was a veritable asshole. Some people would still say that I definitely still have that streak in me, and can't deny it. Comes out every once in a while. But I'm actually consciously try to not be an asshole nowadays. And I try to keep other people in mind when I speak about certain things. So, for example, there are people like the individual that I was talking about who go into topics, at a level which, when you know that someone you're talking to has no idea about the background that you assume, and that you have a pretty good idea in thinking that they don't have this background because they're not philosophy nerds, especially they're not Hegel nerds or anything, and you start getting into arguments about technicalities and term usage, which is so far from the common understanding of things. It's a bit alienating, pretty condescending, and pretty elitist. And especially when you do it very smugly. There's a way to do it innocently and go like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you understood this or not." But there are some people just go on and on and on and just like to browbeat you with their erudition. And I don't like to do that, although admittedly I used to. I used to be this kind of insufferable asshole. But anyways, that's not really the point I'm getting at. Besides being an asshole, I was an asshole who was not particularly interested in anything philosophical whatsoever. The only interest I really had in sociological issues were rather technical. I was more attracted to what you would call technocracy now. And the idea of politics just seemed utterly stupid to me. The idea of problems of social nature, such as racism, systematic racism, the way language and concepts enforce certain modes of life. I didn't really care about those, and so I was the kind of person who was very edgy, and I said stuff like the N-word and other terms, which are not which are not acceptable in polite society, and really shouldn't be acceptable in any normal society, to be frank. And I used to be that kind of edgy 4chan person. Besides that, most of what I spent my life doing was sitting on my ass playing video games. And like so many people who are in their teens nowadays, the dream was, well, maybe I'll do something like make video games. You wanted to become like an artist, but what does that mean? You wanted to become a graphic artist, not to create, these grand, meaningful works of art or whatever, but rather because you just wanted to make games. You just wanted to have fun. screw the larger sense of life and larger things of more importance. What was important was to have fun, to make money, and life is a game. And when you grow up, spending up, I think I spent something like probably upwards of 5,000 hours growing up, like playing video games. That's probably on the low side. And I was like that all the way up to high school. And, if you look at the trajectory of my life, you would never guess that I would end up where I am at all. I never would have guessed, never would have thought that I would get to the point of view which I'm at and where I would be interested in the things that I'm interested in. So how did I get into philosophy? Well, funny enough, the this is a sort of weird, but apparently it's not that weird. I started getting into critical thinking, quote unquote critical thinking, through conspiracy theories, which is kind of bizarre. At least it seems bizarre to me. Somewhere around eighth grade, I think, I was looking at certain things to pirate. Being poor, you don't afford video games, so you just you borrow them indefinitely. And I remember I was looking at this website, looking for a pirated version or a cracked version of Steam. If you ever play video games on PC, Steam is like the number one platform for video games. Back then, it was still not the number one platform, but it was by that time starting to be the biggest platform. It was starting to take over the entire market, which now it dominates. But I found this website called Steam, which was incredibly a website run by somebody who both programmed a cracked version of that software and who also, on the same place that he hosted that software, was a forum which was basically a libertarian Ron Paul standing website, which peddled in a ton of conspiracy theories. And, that was just so bizarre to me that I just started reading a lot of the shit that was just posted on that website. And I think that was like my first taste of conspiracy theories at that point. Somewhere a couple years down the line, I watched the Zeitgeist movie, which so many people of my generation watched as well. I don't know, Hyperion, Josh, I don't think you ever seen it. Hyperion, did you ever see that documentary? I mean, when I first watched it, it was just sort of like, yeah, a lot of that stuff is weirdly sensical. And, it made you think, and when you're young and stupid and don't know anything, you would think that those kinds of things are not the kinds of things that you should get into. But honestly, I think, it's actually better for people to get into those things young, when they're young, stupid, and impressionable. Yeah, I've seen all three as well. Mainly because it starts getting you to think. There's a lot of things in which you just, at that point, have never even thought of in your life. And you encounter information opposite and otherwise to what is just the orthodox accepted view of things. And it gets you thinking. And, and because of that, I started to become, some things posted there made sense. Some things I thought were just, that's just too crazy. The Alex Jones, they're making the frogs gay. They're trying to kill us all. The FEMA camps, that stuff is ancient. But it was all over that website. And, I was into it for about a year or two. And then after that, I stopped really paying attention. After I watched Zeitgeist, I got more interested in the the Anunnaki stuff is like deep, under that iceberg. You don't get into that immediately. It took me a long time to I think it was like about 22 when I first met somebody who, unironically took that kind of crap seriously, and I still considered most of it crap. And when you say, wait, what do you mean most of it? I'll leave that for some other things. There are weird things. But no, I don't think that there's like some weird Anunnaki conspiracy going on. No reptilians, trying to take over the world. Not that I care. But anyways, going back to my story. So, anyways, and I'm sorry, I keep saying anyways. I'll try to watch my repetition. It's the California accent. It's the various ways in which we replace things just for filler, like the word like and anyways. So I'm sorry for that aside. So, anyways, the proper use. With Zeitgeist, I ended up getting into the whole criticism of religion thing, and it took me quite a couple of years. I think I saw that around ninth grade, and it really did strike me. A lot of what is shown in that, even though now that I look at it, and there were works back then criticizing it, nonetheless, what was really powerful in all of that for me uh, was the things, or were the things that brought into question Christianity and the just regular Orthodox religious view of things. The uniqueness of Christianity, the way in which the documentary, which is not very well sourced. The main source is that one. I forget what the person's name was, but they were not very good scholars of anything. A lot of it was just kind of just very lazy, shoddy misinterpretations, and just taking the word of kooks. Oh yeah, I never got into the whole atheist community online back then. I think the most that I got into was Richard Dawkins, and it was mainly well, that's down the line. I'll talk about later. It's not that much more down the line. Yeah, Peter Joseph is the one who made it, but the source of most of of the religious stuff in Zeitgeist is somebody else. Like he mainly used some other book. So, anyways, I mean, I was never quite religious. I always had this yeah, Karya S. It's a pseudonym as well, as far as I understand. I was never a hardcore religious person. I there were a few times in which I had attempted praying, and I found it utterly useless because God never answered any of the prayers that I made. So you kind of give up um, pretty quickly. Lyndon LaRouche, no, didn't know. But anyways, I was not a very strong believer, but I had just grown up within a background and milieu of just regular Orthodox uh, Protestant Christianity, particularly what is called now Pentecostal. A lot of people who believe in like speaking in tongues and blah blah blah. And I mean, that's a lot of modern Protestant sects, really. At least where I'm at, those sects are all over the place. It's just the common thing. All I know that there's some few sects that find that stuff to be actually not divine but demonic. Uh, but I never found any interest in that stuff. I was never really convinced. There were people who went crazy, a little bit crazy when praying, but I just thought, well, this is fucking weird and uncomfortable. As I sat in church bored. But I had never really thought much about it. There's the atheism that comes from just a sort of disinterest in the church, and just a general disillusionment that I think is what most people who call themselves atheists really have. It doesn't come out of a critical appraisal of oh, the metaphysical reasons for this don't make sense. It rather just comes to the fact like, look, I didn't get anything out of religion. God never answered my prayers. Fuck God. Therefore they don't exist. And that's just sort of empirical basis of, you know, well, they told me there was a daddy in the sky, but the daddy in the sky never shows up. So, hey, line boy. So most people who don't believe in God don't believe for those reasons. I never really believed, but I didn't really disbelieve until I got into the whole criticism of religion, particularly from that historical point of view in the Zeitgeist movie. Later beyond that, it took me quite a few years. I think it was not until like 2 years later, around the end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade, that I actually read The God Delusion, which I had known existed way back in 7th grade. I don't know how I knew it existed. I had been searching for something on the internet in school while, we were doing nothing. And I came upon that book. And, you just read the Wikipedia entry and you're like, okay. And you're not somebody interested in any of those topics, and you just move on with your life. And so by the time I got around to that book, I when I got that book, I had known about it I had wanted to read it for about a year, and I assumed that my local library either had it or would have gotten me a copy had I bothered to go there. But I had that visceral fear that you get when you're questioning something that seems unquestionable. And not only that, I mean, had my parents ever found a book like that in my possession, the punishment I would have endured would have been probably worse at the time than what I endured once they found out, that I was an atheist, uh, which happened halfway. Actually, no, it happened at the end of 11th grade. No, it actually be happening like right at the beginning of 12th grade for me. But anyways, I read The God Delusion on PDF. Finally, I found an online PDF version. Just kind of read it in the living room in front of my parents as they watched TV. They never checked on what the hell it is that I was reading those days. I used to always read a lot just because I got bored, and when you have a computer that can't play many video games and your parents are, strictly for the use of computers only for business and, educational things, the only fun I could have was reading Wikipedia articles about things I was interested in. And so I found a copy of The God Delusion. And it was, at the time, fire for me. It just opened up the floodgates of how much nonsense the usual layman's conception of God in Christianity was. And after I read that, it was it fully completed my critical stance on that, and I became one of those new atheist people who are very insufferable. But I never let my parents know about it. At school, but by that time I had sort of become open with my friends and said, I don't really believe in this God bullshit. Same problem. Couldn't play Warcraft with Dota. I didn't get into Dota until like I think 12th grade, like middle 12th grade, I think, because my friends got into it. And so, anyways, I read it in about 11th grade, and it took all the way until the beginning of 12th grade, in which I once went with my parents to church because my mom was still forcing me to go to church in those days. It's like her house, her rules. And on that particular day, on a Sunday, it was just too crazy for me. There were people blabbering. There were like 5 people blabbering in tongues and crying and wailing and rolling on the floor. I mean, it was as crazy as I had ever seen it. I mean, if you ever seen video compilations on YouTube, people speaking tongues and whatnot, saying like South Korea, it was almost like that. Not to that extent of that many people. Like it wasn't a mega church, but it was rather uncomfortable to the point where like I just wanted to step out, so I did. And like 20 minutes later, my mom comes out and hounding me and saying, "What are you doing out here? Get back in there." And I'm like, you know what? There's no point in me hiding this anymore. I'm 18. I'm just gonna speak my mind on this. And so I told her, you know what, I don't believe in this bullshit. To me, it's all nonsense. And then, she got really pissed at me. And I had the pastor come and talk to me. And the pastor's like, "You don't understand what you're saying, young man." And I'm like, yes, right. And, as you can tell that when there are people who don't really know anything, and yet they want to pretend that they're very erudite and educated about things, and they try to one up you with reason when they're not very good at reasoning themselves. And so they couldn't convince me, and they didn't give me much work beyond that. But after that day, for like about the next month, it was a living hell in my house. But that's more personal stuff. Either way, I got semi kicked out, as well as just I decided to just leave. I had a good friend of mine, one of my best friends still, who told me, hey, if you get kicked out, you can come and stay here, while we finish out the year. And so, I decided to get the hell out of my house, and so I did. And so beyond that, that transformation, that transformation from, not particularly like theist, but rather just releasing yourself from that dogma and having a rational reason as to why. And the rational reason was not particularly to do with like, anything personal that happened to me so much as the thing I was most disillusioned and particularly angry about was the feeling that society had lied to me. And not just to me, but to everybody. That when you expose a lie, quote unquote, a lie on that level, it's infuriating. It's kind of like the same anger and fury that I felt, once I understood leftist critique of capitalism, you say with Marxism and whatnot, it makes you furious. Do you believe in the lie society? No, Josh, I no longer believe in the lie society. You know that. Um, but yeah, so going back to what I was saying, the particular thing that made me angry was that the feeling that we had been lied to, and that kind of goes in with a lot of what I suppose people who get into conspiracy theories, are all up in arms about for the most part. It's part of it is like the horror of like, oh my God, they're trying to exterminate us all or whatever, or the aliens or Anunnakis. It doesn't matter what it is. Some whether they're doing nefarious things, that's part of the horror of like, oh, this terrible stuff's happening. But the other part, which I think is more disappointing and it makes people more angry than anything, is just that general realization, or at least belief in the realization, that almost everything that you have ever believed is based on lies. And that resonated most strongly with me, particularly because for most of my life, as far as I can remember, I've always had this curiosity for what things really are, for truth. Not in a deeply philosophical sense. It's not that I was a child and I love truth and all these other things. The notion of truth had just been so everyday and meaningless that you just don't think about it, right? And I'd particularly been very curious, mostly about science, empirical science, material science. I had always mostly been attracted to space and astronomy. Those things that seem most profound and most beyond us. The stars are so far away, the planets are so big. Space is so vast and yet so empty. And here we are, slowly trudging through it, figuring out all these things. And as I grew up, I maintained that love of astrophysics more than anything. I mean, I was interested in other things as well. I found a lot of things generally interesting on the conceptual level. I wasn't aware of that when I was a kid. But as yes, I do love that leprosy in the sky. It is quite beautiful. I will admit it's no longer as beautiful as it used to be, but it's still quite beautiful. I think what I love about it is more so the sublimity of it, that has this feeling of immensity which is not graspable. Um, but anyways, going back to what I was saying, space is the stupidest thing there is. I agree with that. So I always was curious ever since I was a child, and so that's part of what kept me away from falling into the religious or the religiosity of of most people around me, in which I was not willing to just accept what the Bible said. If I grew up watching stuff like Discovery Channel. Even though we didn't always have it. My parents got cable on and off, and it was a treat when we had it back when Discovery Channel, was actually fucking good and actually had stuff that made you, learn as opposed to just entertain you. And I also loved, just astronomy books. Whenever I could we'd go to libraries and I'd grab those, star books, astrophysics books, with big pictures of stars, information about the planets, what, and back then, even now, we still have, every year there's something new. If you buy one of those space almanacs every year, you'll find a significant portion of information probably gets updated, you know, about every year or two. Back then, so many things were being learned about the nature of stars. So many things were being learned about black holes. We were barely getting notions of, I remember when they still didn't know whether, what was at the center of the Milky Way could be called a black hole or not. Nowadays they're pretty sure, but nowadays it doesn't matter because, quite frankly, I don't believe in black holes anymore. That in itself is a whole different story. So that whole line of curiosity, and that always kept me at bay with in contention with the Bible. Besides the fact that in a typical church, or at least I don't know about a Catholic church because I only attended a Catholic church once with a friend, and just seemed pretty boring to me. The only churches I've ever been to have been Protestant churches, and the Hispanic Protestant church is quite frankly a bore. I mean, truly a bore. I don't know why most people go. It's the same sermons every year. There's not very much depth to it. I mean, literally, most of these pastors uh, interpret the Bible literally. So, I mean, when they ask, they're like, so and so, stand up and read that passage, and the reader's like, what do you think that means? And if you literally just go, well, it says exactly what it says, and they're like, yeah, it's exactly what it means. And there's not much thought that goes into that, so it's not very interesting for somebody like me who is prone to meaning seeking in the deeper sense of things. That kind of stuff is just like, well, why are we bothering? Trying to pretend that there's something deep. I went to Sunday school a few times as I was growing up, and I felt utterly stupid. Uh, Not because I was a dumb person who couldn't have thought up these incredible interpretations. I like had somebody presented me with something, say like uh, Swedenborg, or I mean, hell, something like the interpretations of Cornell West, I would have felt stupid in the proper way, in which I would have thought, wow, I couldn't have thought of anything like that. And if you see it in the text, reflected in the text itself, it overwhelms you. uh, and then you start appreciating that text as being not something stupid but something deeply meaningful. But no, I felt stupid in the sense that I just felt stupid being there, like a waste of time, because most of the people who were there didn't really want to be there apparently, and they weren't the thinking types, and neither was the pastor. And so the whole attempt to read anything and to learn something from it was so utterly barren that quite honestly, it's just I felt like falling asleep. For most of the time that I was in church, I'd spend time just reading the Bible ahead of where we were. Because why? The pastor's blabbering away, the people are just like taking their turns, and some people would sometimes bring up personal anecdotes and go on and on and on and on, and you'd be like, can you please get to the point? And they wouldn't. So I think I read like the Bible twice over uh, while I was in church. Over the years, just on Sundays, not particularly, on my own. I didn't really care. But I think I read it once. Hyperion, are you saying that I'm Hispanic, or are you asking me something, Hyperion? Because yes, I am his. Well, I don't know. I don't know why there's the two terms Hispanic and Latinos. Because Latinos don't consider themselves Hispanics. Um, even though I mean, like, it literally means the same thing. The same Hispanics that went to Central America and South America are the same ones that went to Mexico. So I don't know what the difference is. I mean, clearly the dialects of speaking are different. The Spanish terminology is slightly different, but you can communicate nonetheless. The styles of speaking are very different. Central Americans tend to speak much faster or tend to be more louder, but that seems to be a thing of just the tropical areas of the world. Quite frankly, I mean, it's like Cubans. If you ever meet a Cuban, Cubans are very loud and talk very fast. And Mexicans are more subdued. They're more laid back. But then Mexicans tend to not consider themselves Hispanics either. They just consider themselves Mexicans. And so I don't get what the whole distinction of Hispanics and Latinos is. I don't know why the Latinos call themselves Latinos. I mean, surely there must be some historical reasons for that, but I have never actually cared to look into it. I probably should. Oh, don't get me started on Chicanos. Chicanos aren't, like, most people who call themselves Chicanos aren't even from Chicago. I mean, the Chican X, yeah, that's a thing. Uh, Limeboy, I'm starting to write a philosophy blog, just catching out theories I constantly think about. Any advice? Only advice I would give is think very carefully. That's about it. Think very carefully. Be humble. And when I say be humble, is like you don't really have to. It'd be nice if you can engage a community of people who are on your level, but at the same time, that's not exactly a good thing. Because you see somewhere like the community of Less Wrong, or I mean, there's been other communities other than Less Wrong, which are these, enlightened intellectuals who are, out there in the aether of ideas, just speculating on their own. And those people then get caught up in their own communities and just get stuck within the confines of their own self-contained discussions, which are not very high quality to begin with, and then suffer from the further lack of actual critical high quality from anybody else who's more knowledgeable. So getting to those communities, I think, is probably originally nice in that it gives you some comfort in not feeling overwhelmed with being too far out. It's not like you go and immediately starting a conversation with hey Matt, starting conversations with like a professor or something. I can see how that's terrifying. Even I find that uncomfortable. There's people who I talk to every once in a while. I ask them questions, but at very very well worded and at best calculated questions, as I can make it, because otherwise these people are ready to rip you apart. Rightfully so, because they care about the quality of discussion and arguments. Uh, but other than that, I mean, just like think about it as well as you can, and read literature. As much as I would say that literature, especially that secondary literature, can poison you in getting you too comfortable with thinking that you grasp something when you really don't. I mean, most of that secondary literature as thinking at a level that is much better than whatever level you begin with when you don't know anything. So read secondary literature on things, or if you can, go ahead and hit some first primary literature. There's plenty of stuff that's interesting for itself, but mainly read what's interesting to you. Don't read what other people tell you that you should begin with, because it's not really how one learns very well. But anyways, to get back to my to my little story here. So by the time of 12th grade, I had become critical of religion. I had become, well, I had somewhat half being kicked out, half run away from home on my own. And I just kind of started getting bored of uh, of their usual stuff. I don't, people ask, well, how does one grow and how does one develop? And that experience of mine tells me that nobody has a fucking clue how that really happens. That you can't tell somebody, hey, just grow up. Don't you want to grow up? Don't you want to be an adult? To spend time. Um, there's some people on YouTube who love to spend their times making these long series of videos telling people how to live their lives and what they should be doing. Uh, like telling people, quit playing video games. Do something with your life. And some of them are smarter than others. Like some people don't just tell you, well, quit playing video games. Do something real. At least go do something like sports. Well, sports aren't really that much more meaningful in human life than a video game is. Or like playing chess, being a master chess player is not really that much more meaningful in the human community than playing video games is. All those kinds of activities are not exactly meaning making in the deep sense of the word. And so, somebody coming around and telling me, hey, quit playing video games. Just talk to me on messages on Twitter if you want to. So I didn't quit video games because I came to this dawning realization. Holy shit, I'm wasting my life. I should be doing something meaningful. How about I pick up philosophy? Rather, it's just I eventually got bored of the crap. It's just I suppose that's just how people mature. That's how you end up just moving and growing out of things. And so, despite the fact that I spent somewhere of at least 5,000 hours, assuredly more, I think, playing video games throughout my childhood and teenage years. A lot of that also was spent increasingly more by the time of high school, just reading generally about everything. I had a general curiosity about everything. I was learning about, particularly because of the Zeitgeist movement. Honestly, after Peter Joseph launched the websites for the second film, which was Zeitgeist Addendum, and then this whole network of things, in an attempt to make a real movement, so to say. A lot of it was very informative, actually. Just all news about engineering breakthroughs, news about all kinds of chemical breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, practical things of material life. And that just got caught up also with my interest in physics. My love for that has waxed and waned over the years, but it will always remain a perennial love for me. And at the time, that was like one of my deepest loves, especially because that's how I really started to get into the philosophical besides the critique of religion, which sparked some conceptual thinking, but not really conceptual so much as just this abstractly rational. And by the time I was in 12th grade, I was at that point in which, like, they get you with physics in the sense of a lot of people are interested because it seems like magic, and the way that they explain it seems so much like magic. Which is kind of funny. You start out with this notion in which science detests magic, and yet you get to that point in which science has become magic in the literal sense. I mean, a lot of what people think about quantum mechanics is literal nonsense, which literally is just science, not science. I mean, magic. As far as people are concerned, quantum mechanics is magic. You can put a probability equation to anything, and anything is in principle possible. If you listen to people like Michio Kaku and other weirdos, a lot of things just, or like Lawrence Krauss, for example, when Lawrence Krauss had, made his book, A Universe from Nothing. I remember watching that lecture so many times and, just feeling like my mind was blown, not because I grasped the conceptual nature of anything. It's not because I understood it, but it's precisely because I did not understand it and I felt I could not understand it. And here was somebody who seemed to speak with the authority and the comfort of somebody who understands, but he really didn't understand, afterwards, once I got into those things. And it's precisely because I wanted to understand it that I started to get into to questions of, trying to study it as much as I could. And I tried to at least grasp the concepts. The mathematics was always a bit too much for me. Even though, as I've looked at it over the years, a lot of people say, it's actually not as complex as it seems. You see a lot of symbols that aren't familiar to you, and you hear these terms that don't seem, they seem very, very high up, but they actually aren't. There's just a very different, it's just a different math formalism. It's like comparing calculus to algebra. It's not really that calculus is any more difficult than algebra. It's just a different way of doing things. And so, it's not that relativity is really this supremely difficult mathematics that, that's very difficult to master. Really isn't, according to most people. But anyways, in me trying to understand the concepts of this, eventually I got into, thinking things on my own, not because I felt this egoic desire that that I want to think for myself, and I have this power to reason or not. To me, it was just me chasing speculations that just popped into my head. When you read widely enough, when you are curious enough, I suppose, and when there's some bit of thought going on behind your head, you end up synthesizing things, as you see them. You start seeing analogies, you start going, wow, this seems like that, and you start thinking, what if these things go together? What if these manifest, some sort of similar nature? And that's what I was getting into in those days. And, certain things popped into my head about the nature of time, the nature of space. And when I searched them up on Google, I found that, people with PhDs and, programs and whatnot were working on these kinds of questions. And, that certainly gives you an ego boost in thinking, wow, I'm, maybe I'm capable of something. But also in getting into those things, I ended up getting into reaching such a limit in which, I got past that limit without knowing it. I found these websites of people who claimed that relativity was wrong, that there were just fundamental problems with the standard way that we looked at physics. And being open-minded and seeing that these people put in a lot of effort into a lot of these websites. You would call them crank websites now, and a lot of them are crank websites, but nonetheless, even within the cranks, if you just ignore a lot of the clearly personal vendettas they have against the establishment, they end up saying a lot of things that are just conceptually clear and very true. And so I remember that when I first got my taste of anti-Big Bang theories, particularly I found the stuff about um, process, what would you call it? I forget what the name of the theory is by some Australian professor. But process physics, I think he called it, and it's basically a foam theory of space and quantum mechanics, in which he claims that space is always on the micro quantum scale, always being created and destroyed, and that space, in a way, is being created within the void, between the voids of galaxies, which is out pushing out and being absorbed by the matter uh, in well, that we call galaxies. And so there's a way in which there's a constant creation, a constant absorption, in which matter exists because it absorbs this extra energy in space and blah blah blah. Very interesting stuff. And I found this because of some other guy who had a more readable website, also more intelligible to my beginning mind, who was just a very disgruntled astronomer, but he had a lot of pages about the concept of aether and all these other things. And so I got interested in a lot of that stuff, simply because it just made outright sense, conceptually. Sure, materially, I couldn't, tell you. Fred Hoyle? No, it's not Hoyle. It's someone else. Definitely, the name is different. But anyway, so by that point, I had reached the standpoint of philosophy, but I did not know it yet. It still took about 4 years after, I think, for me to realize that these were philosophical uh, issues. Before that, these were just physical issues, which I had some inkling, and these people who were talking about them, had some inkling that these had to do with philosophy, but what they called it was natural philosophy, and that was only a small subset of them. A lot of them just kept speaking in the manner in which like they were just doing physics, and then all they were doing is just foundational physics, theory of foundational physics, but they didn't see it as doing metaphysics of any kind. Hoyle's stellar nucleus synthesis guy. He's not the only guy. There's more. There's multiple people who have that theory. It's not exactly. It wasn't an original theory of the Australian guy either. I mean, a lot of these people share similar circles. So, anyways, I mean, getting to that stuff, becoming critical of religion, becoming eventually critical of scientific establishment, questioning physics as we understand them is apostasy nowadays. I don't know how many of you are critical of standard physics. I doubt most of you are even interested in that kind of stuff, where you would, be having a conversation in which you say, well, I don't think the Big Bang is true, or that black holes don't exist, or that, that quantum particle wave duality, is nonsense. But, when you start getting into those kinds of things, people automatically dismiss you. When I've brought this up online in forums, for example, I think I posted a couple times on Reddit once in some thread that was, the typical, like, look, Einstein predicted all these other things, and, he was such a genius. And, it pisses me off, not because I don't think Einstein was a genius. Einstein really was a genius, I think. Or rather, he had genius. But, if you get into and trying to give any arguments, whether they be empirical or philosophical, and, with me, it's not just philosophical issues, it's empirical issues, experimental issues, in which a lot of things that people believe and take for granted aren't actually true. They're just things that are basically myths that have been told by scientists who themselves don't realize that they're myths. They just accept them. It's not until somebody points out, hey, look at the original stuff, and you'll see that it's not actually what they say it is. And that's very interesting. But it also gets you immediately pointed at and hung in the jury of the public eye, simply because, how dare you claim that you understand more than these geniuses, or more than the established orthodoxy. Look, they're scientists, they know all these things, and it's basically the current cult of scientism. And so me breaking through that without intending to is certainly one of those things that made me, or primed me, for getting into philosophy. Besides the criticism of religion, which by the time I had gotten out of high school, by the end of 12th grade, I'd already simmered down on my atheism. I was no longer a militant atheist. I didn't care about the culture war against, the stupid Christians or stupid Muslims or whatever. I came to the acceptance and realization of what Marx later talks about, that religion was a way in which, a lot of people just cope with the world, and I hadn't thought about it metaphysically back then. I still thought metaphysically it was just kind of nonsense. I wouldn't say that I had any opening for the possibility of God being real, but, I had no longer the same, anger and malice that made me want to, just go and strangle every religious person that I ever met, that dared to try to tell me, I should go to church, or, or that gets mad when somebody says, bless you, when they sneeze. But yeah, by the time I got into college, I had simmered down on the atheism thing, and my interest in physics was at its highest. I'd gotten to by that time I'd gotten to listening to a bunch of people who were part of the then so-called Natural Philosophy Alliance, which is now the John Chappell Philosophy Alliance, Natural Philosophy Alliance, or which is full of people who are not cranks, who are legitimate, university professors and instructors, and people who work in, the private and the public industry, mostly engineers, practical and theoretical engineers as well, who had made free presentations and put up their papers freely. And I mean, there was sorry if it disconnected. As I was saying, I learned so much in that time of from 18 to 22 that I've forgotten most of it, honestly. I used to have this treasure trove of documents and files and pages saved on the multiple PCs that I've gone through over the years, which I'm sad I've lost, because I had so many amazing papers and even books about these topics, which were very interesting. There's somebody on a buggy or something. All right. Hopefully that should be better. All right. Let me know this is better. It's kind of the best position I can get. But anyways, as I was saying, I had gotten into international philosophy at that point, and it still hadn't struck me that I was really into philosophy. I was still mostly in it for the physics. I was mostly interested in look at those beautiful clouds. Anyways, I was mostly in it for the physics, and I had learned quite a bit, a lot about aether theory, a lot about misconceptions that people have about concepts of space, concepts of particles, a lot of deconstruction, you would say, about the things that we assume we know about these, because quote unquote scientists use certain words that mean certain things in the common language, but don't mean those things in the actual language that they're talking about. and so it causes a lot of confusions in which people don't know, how strange what is being talked about really is. And not much longer after that, I got into my first philosophy class, and it ended up being, pretty boring, interesting, but pretty boring up until the end on the question of free will. And that's when I really, really fell in love with philosophy. That's when it really struck me that that's the kind of thing that I was really doing all along and going towards all along. I'd been thinking here and there randomly, getting these small insights, um, mostly through structures of thought, through analogies, but I had never really hadn't gotten really to conceptual thinking. And it's not until the end of my first philosophy class, on the topic of free will, that I really felt that for the first time I was thinking about the problem, and that I understood the problem, and that the issue of the problem had nothing to do with something that could be settled by some sort of empirical inquiry or anything else. It was really a conceptual issue. And that's how I ended up getting into philosophy. And why? But anyways, my phone is about to die, so that will wrap up the stream. For those of you who watched and listened, thank you. For those of you who had some comments to say, thanks. It gives me it gives me something to jump off of and bounce things off of while we're doing streams. So we'll leave it at that. You have a good time.